Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into building energy efficiency. It's always a hot topic.
Yeah.
And you sent in some interesting stuff for this one. A research paper with a pretty cool new method for measuring insulation effectiveness. And someone's resume.
Interesting.
So we'll touch on that resume a little bit later, but first let's talk about this new method. It's called the one-point efficiency parameter, or OPEP for short. Have you heard of this?
I have. It's a really clever approach, trying to figure out how well insulated a building is without tearing down walls or bringing in, expensive equipment. OPEP gives you a surprisingly accurate estimate using just temperature readings.
Okay. I am intrigued. But before we get to the technical stuff, the paper starts with this story. I think you'll appreciate this. Researchers were checking temperatures in a building, and they found a 7-degree difference between the floor and the ceiling.
Oh, wow.
Could you imagine standing in a room where your feet are freezing, but your head is toasty warm?
That's a great illustration of why insulation matters. Heat wants to escape, and a good insulation system keeps it evenly distributed, so you're comfortable from head to toe.
Yeah, makes sense. So where does OPEP fit into all of this?
Well, it helps you quantify how well the building is doing at keeping that heat in.
Okay, so how does it actually work? Does it involve thermal imaging cameras or something high-tech?
Nope. Much simpler. It's based on the principle that the better the insulation, the closer the surface temperature of a wall will be to the indoor air temperature. So all you really need is a thermometer. Measure the wall temperature, the inside temperature, and the outside temperature.
Okay, so just by comparing those three temperatures, you can tell how well insulated a building is. That's pretty cool.
It is.
I'm guessing there's a formula, though.
There is.
I'm no math whiz, but I'm willing to give it a shot.
All right. Well, the formula can look a little intimidating at first glance, but when you break it down, it's very intuitive. Just think of it like a scale, right? That's comparing these two temperature differences. So on one side of the scale, you have the difference between the wall temperature and the inside temperature.
Oh.
And on the other side, you've got the difference between the inside temperature and the outside temperature.
I see where you're going with this. So if the wall temperature is really close to the inside temperature, that means the insulation is doing a good job.
Exactly.
And so the scale tips in favor of good insulation.
Exactly. And the formula takes all of that information and calculates a single number. And we call that the OPEP value, which represents how well the insulation is performing. So a higher OPEP means better insulation and less heat loss.
So basically, higher OPEP equals cozier and more energy efficient house.
That's a great way to put it.
I like it. Now, I'm really interested to see how this works in a real world scenario. Let's say I'm trying to decide between two houses to buy, and I want to think about, heating costs and all that.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. OPEP can be a really useful tool in that situation.
So I could just take some temperature readings in each house, plug them into the formula, and the house with the higher OPEP is probably going to be the one that saves me money on heating.
You got it. It gives you a really quick and easy way to get a sense of which house is better at holding on to that heat. Of course, there are other factors to consider, like the size of the house and the efficiency of the heating system.
Right.
But OPEP can give you a really great starting point.
So this is all making sense to me. I like how practical it is. But I'm also wondering, are there any times when OPEP might not be as reliable? What if I took measurements on a super sunny day? Wouldn't that affect things?
Yeah, you're right. Direct sunlight on the wall that you're measuring, it can definitely skew the readings. It's best to take measurements on a cloudy day or on a wall that's shaded.
Okay, so you want to isolate the effect of the insulation itself and not the sun baking the wall. Anything else to watch out for?
Well, the method does assume that the temperatures are relatively stable, both inside and outside. So if there are big temperature swings going on, that could throw off the accuracy.
Okay, so like a crazy roller coaster of weather outside, probably not the best time to bust out the thermometer. But what about inside? What if my thermostat is acting up, or I just like to crank up the heat for a few hours? Would that affect things?
Yeah, good point. A consistent indoor temperature is important for reliable OPEP readings. The method assumes that you have a functioning HVAC system that's maintaining that steady temperature. If you have big fluctuations inside, that'll definitely affect the results.
Okay, so stable temperatures are key. Got it. Now, you mentioned that OPEP is a relatively quick and easy way to assess insulation, but is it the be-all and end-all of energy efficiency evaluations, or are there times when you'd need a more in-depth analysis?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that OPEP is an estimate, a really helpful one, but it is still an estimate. So think of it as a quick health check for your house, right? It gives you a general idea of how well it's insulated, but it doesn't replace a full medical exam. If you need a very detailed analysis, a professional energy audit is the way to go.
That makes sense. So it's a first step, a way to identify any potential problem areas before calling in the experts. But even as a preliminary assessment, it seems like OPEP could be super valuable, especially for homeowners trying to figure out where to start with energy-saving upgrades.
Absolutely. It can help you prioritize. Like if you find that a certain wall has a much lower OPEP than the others, that could be a sign that you need to add more insulation in that area. Or if you discover that your windows are a major source of heat loss, maybe it's time to consider replacements.
So instead of just feeling those cold drafts and wondering where they're coming from, OPEP can give you some concrete data to work with.
I love that. Speaking of windows, the paper mentions a really cool way to use OPEP for comparing the efficiency of walls and windows.
Oh, right. You can actually calculate a separate OPEP value for a window. Just measure the temperature of the inside glass panel. Then you can compare that to the OPEP of the wall to see which one's losing more heat.
So if my window feels like an icebox, I'm guessing that's a bad sign, and the window OPEP is going to reflect that.
Exactly. And it might motivate you to look into better insulated windows, or even just weather stripping to seal up those drafts.
Now, before we move on, we did mention that you sent over a resume along with this research paper, and it turns out it belongs to the author of the paper himself, Dr. Lev Nemotin. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. He's got a background in mechanical engineering and even nuclear reactor safety. It's quite a diverse set of skills. Yeah, it makes you wonder, how did he end up developing this clever method for measuring insulation? Like, what was the spark of inspiration? Unfortunately, the paper doesn't really delve into his personal journey, but it's fun to imagine the path that led him to this point.
It's a good reminder that innovation can come from unexpected places, and that connecting seemingly different fields can lead to some really cool breakthroughs.
Well, maybe someday we'll get to have Dr. Nemotin on the show.
Yeah.
But for now, let's bring it back to you and how you can use this knowledge about OPEP. You've clearly been thinking about energy efficiency, so what stands out to you from our conversation so far? What are you going to try out in your own home?
Well, this whole deep dive has been really insightful, and I think what's most striking is how OPEP kind of empowers you to take control over your own energy use. It's not a mystery anymore. You can actually measure and understand how well your home is insulated. You can identify areas for improvement, and you can potentially save money on your energy bills.
Yeah, you're taking a peek behind the curtain of building science and realizing it's not as complicated as it might seem.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about those small steps, whether it's adding insulation, sealing up drafts, or even just being more mindful of your thermostat settings. Every little bit makes a difference.
And who knows, maybe you'll even inspire others to join you on the journey to a more energy-efficient future. Now that's a thought. So as we wrap up our deep dive into OPEP, let's recap the key takeaways so you can start putting this knowledge into action.
All right. So we started by talking about the concept of OPEP and how it uses those simple temperature differences to tell us a lot about a building's insulation. It's all based on the idea that the better the insulation, the closer the wall surface temperature will be to that indoor air temperature.
And we broke down that OPEP formula, comparing it to a scale that weighs those temperature differences. The wall versus inside and then inside versus outside. Higher OPEP values mean better insulation, less heat loss, and ultimately greater comfort and energy savings.
And then we looked at some real-world applications of OPEP, like how to use it to compare two houses for their heating efficiency or identify those poorly insulated windows that are letting all the heat escape. OPEP gives you a really practical tool for making informed decisions about your living space and figuring out where you might need to make some upgrades.
We also talked about the importance of understanding the limitations of OPEP. It's not a magic solution, and it works best under those stable temperature conditions. If you want a really comprehensive evaluation, a professional energy audit is still going to be the gold standard.
Absolutely. But even with those limitations, OPEP is a really valuable tool for a quick and easy assessment. You can prioritize areas for improvement, understand the impact of different insulation strategies, and really take control of your home's energy efficiency.
And remember, the journey to energy efficiency doesn't stop here. There's always more to learn, more to explore, and more ways to make a positive impact on your energy use and the environment.
Yeah, so keep experimenting, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of a few temperature readings to open up a whole world of possibilities.
That's a great note to end on. But before we go, I have one final thought-provoking question for you to ponder. So now that you understand OPEP and how easy it is to use, imagine applying it to your everyday life. Like, what if you started seeing the world through an OPEP lens?
That's an interesting way to put it. What do you mean by an OPEP lens?
Well, just think about it. You're walking down the street and you see a row of houses. You can't help but notice the different types of windows, the insulation, maybe even spot some obvious drafts. Suddenly you're not just seeing houses, you're seeing potential heat loss or energy efficiency.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like you've unlocked the secret code that reveals the hidden energy flows within buildings.
Exactly. You might even start noticing these things in your own home. Like you're sitting in your living room and you realize that one wall always feels cold. Now you have a tool to investigate. Grab your thermometer, do a quick OPEP calculation, and see if that wall is a major culprit for heat loss.
And that knowledge gives you the power to take action. Maybe add some insulation or get some thicker curtains. Small changes can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And it's not just about saving money on your energy bills, although that's definitely a nice bonus. It's also about being comfortable at home and reducing your impact on the planet.
Right. It's about seeing the connection between your choices and the bigger picture of energy conservation and sustainability.
So as you continue to explore building energy efficiency, remember that OPEP is just one tool. There's a whole world of information out there. Understanding insulation materials, exploring renewable energy, it's all fascinating.
And the most important thing is to stay curious, ask questions, and keep learning.
Because who knows, maybe you'll be the one to develop the next big energy-saving innovation. The possibilities are endless. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into building energy efficiency, and keep those thermometers handy.